From the dusty plains of Afghanistan to serving the Australian Prime Minister as her personal protection, today's Australian icon has led teams on some of the most high-stake missions as a Special Operations Commando Officer in the Australian Defence Force. For over 16 years, Heston has dedicated himself to defending Australia and its values, championing integrity, camaraderie, and unwavering responsibility, not just to his team, but to our nation, Australia. His story begins in the heart of Brisbane. Born into a family rooted in community, Heston comes from a proud military lineage, 5 generations of army service. He grew up surrounded by stories of sacrifice and dedication to the nation. This legacy instilled in him an unshakable sense of duty and a natural pull towards service. When his military chapter came to a close, his mission evolved. Today, Heston is a powerful advocate for veterans' welfare, mental health, and national accountability, using his voice to ignite change and inspire others to do the same. This is a story of courage, respect, and service. As the host of World Class Voices, I personally am proud to thank Heston on behalf of all Australians for his heroic service to our great nation of Australia. With no further ado, please allow me to welcome Australian hero, Australian legend, and Australian icon, Heston Russell. Welcome to World Class Voices.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Look, I have so much respect for military men. You're a 5th generation military man, Special Operations Commando Officer. Spent a fair bit of time in Brisbane.
Yes.
4 deployments Afghanistan and your 5th deployment to Iraq. What was it like growing up in a military family to start with?
Yeah, good question. It was fun. It was enjoyable. I mean, my dad got out of the military when I was about 6 or 7 years old, but then got back in afterwards. And in particular, my mum's dad, my papa, he was on the hook in Korea and also in Vietnam. And he never spoke about his time in the military, but I always knew he was in the military. And same with my dad and a lot of the other men that I was around. They were just these aspirational men in my life. They were fit, they were confident, they were team players. They had these sort of values that were very family values and very focused, committed and caring and very capable. I remember particularly growing up as a kid, there's a few occasions like being, at a carols by candlelight and someone collapsed and like my dad and his military mate were in there, giving CPR and things like that. They were kind of the guys that were ready to go and they just sort of stood out in society, in my opinion, being that sort of young guy as we grow up, trying to figure out who we are as the story goes, particularly when I became a bit lost in my ways in my high school years. I saw them and their values and their character attributes being that aspirational man that I wanted to be. Yeah,
because so you joined the military at 17.
Yeah, straight out of school.
When did you go, I want to be a military man?
It was about when I was 14 or 15. During high school, I was fat, unpopular, loss of identity, all that good stuff. And I had actually a really good friend of mine who was a son of one of Dad's military mates who was about 5 years older than me, who went down the pathway of ADFA, RMC, and then into the Commandos. We actually served together. And on my 3rd deployment in Afghanistan, we actually deployed at the same time. But I got to see what he was doing. I knew the military men were what I aspired to be. And I sort of, at the age of 14, set the pathway that I was going to become a commando. I wasn't just going to join the military. I was going to become a commando. I wanted to be in the special forces and I wanted to be the best that I could be.
It's very interesting. And I guess like kind of what you're saying is you would look up to the men in your life and see the practical skills that they have in civilian life, probably as a result to their military experience in Korea.
Yeah.
But the skill sets they then brought back to civilian life. Like, do you think it's almost a responsibility as men to be able to kind of have skill sets in alignment with, leadership, protection, and be able to kind of do that sort of stuff?
I mean, that's the classic masculine side. I mean, I don't know. I also have an amazing respect and aspirational admiration for my mum as well, particularly when they divorced and mum ended up raising us a fair bit times in between. But you're right. I mean, I was always brought up in that classic household where there were those masculine values. But at the same time, I think in particular what I saw from these military men was just the way in which that fit into a team, not always needing to be the leader. One of my greatest lessons in leadership, I say, is, in order to be a great leader, you also know how how to and when to be a great follower. And I particularly saw them being great team players, which in particular I see a lot of people when they're relying on authority and that masculinity and I'm meant to be in the lead in charge, it's actually a bit hard for them to be humble and not be. So I got to see this sort of great all-rounder, this adaptability, and a lot of those masculine strength and qualities that were, at the end of the day, what military service is in service to something, be that others or the mission. And I think that's a really big, different mindset and application of those skill sets. A lot of people have those skill sets and therefore feel they need to be at the forefront, but the whole military culture is service before self. And I think in particular, that's what I really got to see growing up as a kid was high-performing individuals, but high-performing for a purpose, be that their family, be that service, be that the community. They were always in service to something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We obviously have a lot of CEOs on the podcast, and a lot of leaders in business, the best leaders also say the same thing. They say they actually work for their customers and they work for their staff.
That's it. Servant leadership. Look, when I joined the military at 17, I had to spend 4 years going through the Defence Force Academy and the Royal Military College, learning the science of leadership while we develop our own art, our own leadership qualities. And the first lesson I learned was that leadership is a service to others. And particularly I see it, say, in the military around the rank of lieutenant colonel and above, or in corporates when people go to a particular rank, there becomes this shift in mindset where I say this entitlement creeps in and people start to believe that being a leader is about being served by others. And I really believe that's where that failure and toxicity in leadership creeps in. It's that mindset of being in service to others. People work with you and you're actually there to support them and accept risk and responsibility and all the rest. That's the best form of leadership I found, that servant leadership.
I actually had a question. It was going to be, are leaders loud? Do leaders need to be loud?
Another favourite quote of mine is leadership is about being the impact player. So the old rugby analogy, picture you're on the bench, you're the team captain, but you're on the bench and you're going to sit there and watch your team play. And you've put in the preparation beforehand to make sure they're the best at their game. Your job is to then sit back and watch and see how everyone's going, see when someone's getting inside their head, if a hit's put someone else off. At the same time, see if someone's doing something dirty, rucking one of your teammates or the rest, and then injecting yourself at that right point in time to demonstrate that leadership, to bring about that inspiration and lead the team forward. I feel a lot of leaders burn their capital through feeling they always need to be out the front, leading from the front, being seen to be leading. The best form of leadership, because in the end of the day, leadership is about motivating people through inspiration. Leaders can motivate through the carrot, through the stick, through management, through authority, but leadership, in my opinion, is that ultimate level of motivation, which is inspiration. And to be able to provide inspirational leadership, you actually need to sit back, allow others to do their thing, and then inject yourself when it's needed for a purpose, instead of always being out the front there.
It's really interesting. I've got a sporting background, and a lot of the time in sports, the best and most experienced players are the leaders. And one of the reasons why that works is because, as a follower, you want to look up to your leader and know that they're incredible at what they do. They're very capable and know that they're, for lack of a better phrase, better than you, or could be better than you if they were in your specific role. How important do you think that is for members of your team knowing that you have done what they're doing, are capable to do it, and are elite at it?
Well, that's the best position to be in, where you have that credibility known by the people you're meant to leave. The hardest part, and we sort of chatted a bit yesterday, sometimes when you come into a new situation, you don't have time to build that credibility to do that. People ask me, what's the best form of leadership? And I just simply say, authentic leadership. And the easiest way to show leadership in a sporting context is leadership by example. And we're talking about physical leadership, stepping up, knowing who you are, having the confidence in what you are and who you are and what you do, and then putting your skills to practice and doing it for the team. That physical leadership or that physical courage is a very easy way to show leadership and inspire people. Much harder sort of in the workplace and in the boardroom. And a lot of time, the other element of courage we talk about is called moral courage and leadership by example, having integrity, doing the right thing when people aren't watching, conducting yourself the way in which you want others to be conducted. Good old leadership line is you never ask people to do something you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. That's the easiest way to build that sort of credibility and to show that leadership.
As a young recruit, when you have young members join the military, you would probably see, okay, he's a natural leader. He potentially isn't, right? You'd probably have those assumptions. How does
I love this conversation. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
How does a young leader show and express his leadership if he is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and actually hasn't done all the things to be a credible leader?
Yeah. So this is the old, like, our leaders born, our leaders made. Being a leader is just about, stepping up and taking the lead when it's required. Again, leadership is something completely different. Leadership is a skill, being able to do that for a purpose. Bear with me. When people talk about they have natural leadership, what actually comes from is that person simply knows who they are and is willing to have the confidence to stand up and be counted when it's needed. It's people who doubt themselves, people still trying to figure things out, people who have, that embarrassment or that nervousness. That's where people are seen, potentially not to have the best leadership skills. There are some fantastic people with leadership skills because they're just so confident and perhaps ignorantly so unhappy to stand forward and do it. But at the end of the day, the best attribute that any leader or wannabe leader can have is authenticity. And that comes from putting in the work to truly knowing like who you are, what your values are, what you're willing to die on a hill for, what you stand for, and then being willing to step forward and show that moral courage and that physical courage to do it. So it's an interesting one. There are some very young, ambitious, good-to-go leaders who probably think they're more capable than they are, and they attract people to them because of their confidence, because of their charisma. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be, fake it till you make it, and they can lead people down the garden path and into an ambush because they're just, this is in training I'm talking about, because they're natural leaders, they're charismatic, they draw people to them. This is where leaders and the best who show leadership have to put in the work and be competent first and foremost. That's what I learned time and time again. The first fundamental of great leaders is being brilliant at the basics, being competent in your job. And you kind of touched on it beforehand, knowing and understanding your role. Like, it's very easy to be good at everyone else's role in order for you to be shown to be, elite, in charge, or the rest. But just like me within the Special Forces, I could do all the stuff that my guys could do to a good standard. But when the shit hit the fan, when the bullets were down range, my job was to be an expert planner and coordinating and tracking where everyone was, and then stepping up and showing leadership where and when it was needed. If I was too busy in there trying to get the first kill going through the door and all the rest, that's great. That might be great physical leadership, but I'm actually failing in my primary job, which is to make sure I know where all of my team is, because if something happens and I need to call in the finger of God from a jet or a helicopter or whatever else, it's going to take me time to compose myself, figure out where my guys are on the map, make sure we're not dropping a bomb on ourselves. So again, leadership is kind of being brilliant at the basics, knowing your role, needing to stepping forward when it's needed, but always remembering what it is your job that you're there to do.
It's absolutely fascinating. What would you say to a young guy joining who's got a bit of an ego? He's a bit delusionally confident. He was the jock at school. He was the captain of the football team, and he's gone, I want to be some macho commando. And he's joined up, and he's got good undergirding leadership qualities and the potential to grow into a great leader. But you need a kind of, you don't want to suppress who he is, because he's, has the potential to be incredible, but you also need to give him put a bit of a silencer on the handgun kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, the system does that for you.
Right. So that's the training, and that's why you spend 4 years in the academy before you even...
Well, that's even just to become an infantry officer. In order to join the commandos, I had to do an extra 3 years as an infantry platoon commander, and then apply for and conduct the selection course, which when I did it was 6 weeks. I started it at about 90 kilos, the same weight as I am here, and finished at the end of the 6 weeks at 79 kilos. And of the 120 people who started my course, there were 30 of us left at the end. And 80% of the people who do not complete or fail the selection course pull out a form and withdraw at own request, because the course is designed to isolate you, make you be alone, put you through the extremes of physical and mental stress to draw out who you are at your authentic and emotional self and help you to go through. To date, it's still the hardest thing I'd done physically and mentally within my life.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's meant to be. It's meant to be when you're out there and you're in difficulty, it's meant to be that perspective point where you look back and say, hey, I've gone 3 days without food and sleep. I'm on day 2 at the moment. I know I can keep going, but my performance deteriorates. It's meant to be a benchmark for you to use throughout the rest of your career and throughout the rest of your life. You know, I learned that I was my most vulnerable when I'm alone. There's a 3-day period where you have to carry 2/3 of your body weight on your pack and go and march 100 kilometers through the bush, navigating by day and night, not allowed to talk to anyone. You know, and I just had these, you get inside your own head and you make up all these own stories. You question your purpose to why you're there. Whereas when you're around others, I'm a person who easily draws motivation from others and like to be in service to others as well.
Right, so the system kind of takes care of those people. What about if we step out of a military example for a moment? Mm-hmm. If you've got a guy in business or even an emerging athlete,
love it.
Are there any sort of things that they can do to kind of check their ego? I call it keeping your ego fuel tank empty.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, checking your ego at the door is the first start. But I mean, it's putting in the work up front to figure out like why you're there. What's your purpose? For us, it's always an example. And even when I go into corporates and do keynotes or workshops, there's 2 things. It's like purpose or the mission, the vision and all the rest. What's the purpose at the collective level and the individual level? And then what are the values that underpin the best version of you achieving that performance? Again, in the commando context, we assess every single person on the commando selection course on every single activity, be it sorting 100 kilos of white rice from brown rice through to carrying the heaviest equipment, the longest distances with teams and casualty evacuations and all the rest. You're assessed simply against the commando attributes. You're not taught anything new on the selection course. You're assessed on your personal character attributes because we know what we need to then go on to the 12 months worth of training to turn you into becoming a commando. So for the athlete and the example that you're given, like their purpose is to perform at the best of their potential. The difference between high performance and elite, in my experience, working with Olympians and athletes and all the rest, is mindset, not skill set. You watch 100-meter sprinters line up for the Olympics and the commentators will go through all the personal best of each people. The winner of that race might not win a world record time, might not even run their fastest time, but they are they're present in the moment, committed, knowing they've put in the work, and are able to focus all their efforts and energy right there in that moment. There are others that simply get inside their head and could have easily won the race 10 times over, but don't run the best race of their life because of the nerves and the performance and all the rest. And putting in the work to understand what you need to be brilliant at the basics, good at your job to achieve that level of performance, but then how you go through and aligning yourself, and this is why we use values. Are you in line with your values? Have you gone through your training and preparation? Are you aligned head, body and heart to being there, present in the moment and that culmination of your level of performance? Do you truly believe, as Maslow puts it, are you in your self-actualized flow state? And it's just that mindset, mental preparation. And time again, we've seen the best people, even on selection courses and all the rest, withdraw themselves because their head got in the way of their body and their heart. They could keep going, but they haven't put in the work. Up here, not even talking about mental health, just talking about, again, the difference between high performance and elite. It's all up here and it's all the training and preparation you do. And ego is one of the first things that will get in the way, that will be that first obstacle in your own way. You know, if you're competing against yourself and what you expect yourself to be because of how everyone else is going to view you, that's so much wasted energy.
It's almost frustrating that this isn't taught at school.
Well, a lot of this is also learning who you are along the journey of life. But you're right. Mindset and giving people the pre-briefing to be able to get into the mindset and better appreciate that mindset that they can achieve or can try and focus and build. Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. I mean, in my personal context, I kept myself in the closet my entire military career of 16 years, not because of anyone else other than I didn't know or understand what I was and I wasn't ready or willing to be the first gay commando and all the rest. And looking back, at any stage, there was still 1 or 2% of me and my energy that was holding back some part of myself. And that didn't allow me to achieve that 100% flow I'm talking about. And again, that's just a simple mindset piece. I was the happiest, most achieved, most fulfilled, most courageous physically and morally in my entire career. But there's still 1 or 2% that I could have put even further into that. Coming back to that, the best form of leadership is true authenticity, knowing and understanding who you are. And all I've learned is it's everyone's journey along that pathway to achieve that. The best performance comes from those people who know who they are personally, not just professionally. And I think the same goes for athletes as well. It's very easy for, like I was in the Commandos and like many athletes are, to be just simply in this echo chamber of performance. And that is excellent till it gets to a point when personal life kicks in, when you fall in love with someone, when emotions come along. For many young men in particular, it's easy for us to achieve high performance when we push emotions to the side. And we realize that in the military as well. There's not much room for emotions. You definitely are emotionally intelligent, but perhaps not emotionally mature because you haven't had to go through the same things in life. Your whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs are provided for you in the life that is a service career. So
what you're saying is you don't have to worry about paying rent. You don't have to go buy groceries. You don't have to go work a job. You don't have to keep a personal budget. You don't have to think about where you're going to invest your money into real estate, into stocks. You don't have to think about business. It's like all of that's
just
not relevant.
I mean, we talk about, cortisol and all the rest and stress and impacts on the body. You just don't have those same stresses. You have fight or flight survival stresses, but you're not worried about, where you're going to sleep, when your next meal is going to come. There's this huge organization behind you. And furthermore, you have a community, you have a tribe of like-minded people who've all wanted to be there. The amazing performance that comes from like-minded people and energy all directing in one location and not having to worry about, the first 3 tiers of Maslow's hierarchy, you're this much closer to achieving that level of, self-actualization and flow.
Mm. I think what would be really great is if we do a quick summary of how the military works. I thought we'd split it into...
How it did work in my time. This is it. The first thing I'll say is the place has moved on so quick. So I'm happy to, as far as I can.
Sure. So I thought we'd split it into 3 different sections. So firstly, the branches, then officer versus enlisted soldiers, and then how general military differs from special operations.
Got it. Okay, cool. So you got, in the Australian military, you got Navy, Army and Air Force. Obviously Navy, water, Army, land, Air Force, air, and space as well. And then, as far as our whole construct is taken from the British construct.
Right.
We came from being part of the British forces through to what we are now. Officer versus enlisted. So officers receive a commission from the Queen, and you have to go and through the Royal Military College for Army. Air Force and Navy have their own schools as well. At the end of the day, being an officer is about being authorised to lead and command people, responsibility and risk. Enlisted is, direct entry straight from school or whatever, and they fulfil all the other roles. As far as trades go, in the Army there's infantry, armoured corps, artillery, signals, engineering, all the rest of it, and all require officers and soldiers. But the officers are the management level, and the soldiers are the entry-level workforce level, and then within the soldier ranks, it does build up through junior and senior non-commissioned officers and all the rest. And then, would you say special forces versus, special forces are the elite elements of the military. In Australia, our special forces are primarily derived from, or primarily sit within Army, but can be joined by any of the 3 services. We have the Special Air Service Regiment over in Perth, and then the Commandos here on the East Coast, and some other cool capabilities in between. Particularly Special Forces these days, I couldn't tell you what it actually is or isn't, but Special Forces at the end of the day is meant to be the tip of the spear and what we say the sort of no-fail mission. They're the force you put in there to achieve high-risk missions and ultimately probably won't have any other backup plan to come in and save and support them. And that's the sort of mission profile we're trained for and the environments that we need to sort of prepare for.
And so how do you become a commando?
Yeah, well, there's a whole application process.
Everyone in the world has heard of buds, which is obviously
The SEALs.
the SEALs in the US, because they're the most, I guess, famous version of special operations globally.
Most movies.
Yep. Most movies.
Yeah. So
do we have an equivalent, I guess?
Yeah, well, so I finished my career as the officer in charge of designing and running the Commando selection course. We brought it down to sort of 4 weeks. And again, it's about selecting the right people for it. And, there's water components. There's not wrestling underneath the water with stealing people's oxygen masks and all that. Navy, the SEALs in the US have much more of a dive-focused capability. But yeah, it's a whole bunch of extremely tough physical and mental challenges to break down people to who they are at an individual level. And then the key part for Special Forces is that's just a selection course. There's still another 10 or 12 months worth of back-to-back courses called the reinforcement cycle that everyone who passes the selection course has to go on and do. So picture heavy weapons, demolitions, parachuting, amphibious operations in the commandos, fast roping out of helicopters, signals, medical courses, back-to-back courses run by current or former serving members of the Special Forces unit you want to go into with top-of-the-world technology and equipment to then train you up to what is then the base level of entry to get into the unit. And then once you're even within Special Forces, there's more advanced courses you complete throughout your career. So it's a minimum 12-month investment just to get into the unit to be the base level of Special Forces, along with whatever they've already done in their career and the other selection just to get into the military itself. So it's quite an investment. For a taxpayer, it's millions and millions of dollars into each individual person just to get them to the point of entry into the Special Forces unit.
But necessary, right, considering the task.
Incredible, absolutely incredible. And that's one of my old warrant officers. He would say this: what makes you special is you're specially selected, specially trained, and specially equipped. And that is the secret of Special Forces. And particularly going through such a professional and deliberate and extreme process just to get into the unit, you can imagine gives you incredible buy-in to the community and the culture you're joining. It makes sure that you absolutely appreciate the seriousness of your job, how coveted that commando green beret is that you get, and what your responsibility is to then represent personally and professionally.
Why did you want to become a commando?
I wanted to be the best. I went from a place of feeling like my potential wasn't being realized and not just wanting to join the military to be a part of it. I wanted to become an officer and I wanted to become a commando. And a lot of it was me going for a goal that made me uncomfortable. I had terrible interpersonal skills. I didn't have friends. I was fat and unpopular sitting at home with my Nintendo 64. You probably don't even know what that is. When I was 13, 14 years old. And I made the uncomfortable decision to push myself to want to be the best I could be, or at least see how far along that line I could get. And it was pretty incredible once I got out of my own way and put in the absolute work behind the scenes and really threw myself into open eyes and ears into the trainings processes that I became a part of, what could be achieved.
Do you think the highest performers, and we can look at this from a military standpoint, but also just general life as well, business, sports, all the rest of it. Do you think people who want to be the best of the best, and usually it's a feeling, it's a bit almost intuitive, and there's this drive and lack of satisfaction if you aren't at the threshold of your potential.
Yeah.
Do you think people that experience that are born like that? Or do you think they become that based on the experiences of their kind of early childhood, adolescence?
I think everyone's born with the potential to be the best leader. We're born with all this amazing potential. And then it's whatever you're brought up in and around and whatever society puts in your way. And the strength of character in who influences you and how you develop your value system from an early base. I've now had the fortune of living in lots of different places and really getting to see some of the highest performers I've seen, some of the billionaires I've seen, are people who were brought up in households where their parents really imparted this environment where you could actually be whatever you wanted to be. but in a responsible way, like you needed to work hard for it. But there was never like, you can't do that, you can't do that. It's like, if you want to do that, you can put in the work. And I think I was very fortunate to be brought up with that sort of similar philosophy from my parents. I mean, my mum was a part-time aerobics instructor, and my dad was in the military. Like, we were, lower class, didn't have a lot of money, but we were happy. And from a very young age, it's like, I was very entrepreneurial. I wanted to breed fish and make money and do all these sorts of things. And my parents always enabled me to do that. And I rapidly realized, like, if I put in the work and put my mind to do something, I could achieve it. And I think it's the secret to success, though, is putting in the work. I'm sure there are a lot of people that you speak to who are very successful in business, and they've definitely put in the work, or there might have been something fortunate that came along, or a mentor, or this or that. My biggest reflection, and where I am probably the most impressed with my own personal performance, was probably training up for the selection course. They provide you with like this 12-week training program, and the selection course for me was in February 2010. And I'd just finished my 3 years in Townsville. I was at home with my mum over Christmas, New Year's in Brisbane. And, the training program required me to wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning to put my pack on and go walk up and down Patrick's Road, the Ferny Hills, while no one's watching, no one's clapping you on, no headphones in because you wouldn't be allowed to have headphones or listen to music, to go to the local dump, the local tip, and find a truck and a tractor tyre, go put them on the school oval across the road, and again, just sit there for an hour or 2 hours and just flipping a tyre up and down a football field, because it's a different type of fitness, and you're going to have to do that. It's a favourite workout for all military sort of arduous exercises. And just the mindset I had, doing that for 3 months, waking up before anyone else was up, your body's sore and you're aching, and every excuse to pull yourself back into bed, but being like, no, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go and do this because this is what I want to achieve. This is my mission. This is my focus. And I was able to fully, manifest and visualize myself being successful. And even my mantra going into the selection course was kicking and screaming. That's the only way they were ever going to pull me off that course. I was never going to withdraw. It's that mindset that I wish I still had that today. But I look back and just appreciate I was able to attain this mindset that I could have achieved anything in the world, and it got me to where I wanted to be.
What's the mental process look like when the mission doesn't really feel like your mission, in the sense of, if you're obviously in a training environment being told to do all of these menial tasks, you're not being told to do them because they need them done. They're obviously trying to train you to do what the mission is.
Yeah.
When we're all human beings, we're not robots.
Yeah.
All the time, I'd only imagine that there'd be military leaders in a position where they go, hang on, what are we actually doing this for? Is this the right way to do it?
Yeah.
And how do you approach that?
I mean, the whole thing is purpose. So particularly in the military context, and again in special forces, you were really not allowed to just give people tasks. You also had to assign them with purpose.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And it helps you do two things. One, confirm for yourself that task needs to be done and you're not just micromanaging.
Yep.
And two, provides people with the opportunity to have initiative, because if they go to do that task and it's already done, they know what the higher purpose is, so that then they can go out there and figure out what other tasks they need to do. I mean, that's probably actually my not handicap, but my sort of a risk at the moment. It's very difficult, even then stepping into corporate world or regular world, where the easiest way to assert your authority is through what we call that micromanagement leadership. I'm the boss, do this. I'm not going to explain why. And particularly if you are intelligent and able to deconstruct things in a positive way, you kind of go, well, we can actually do this better if we did this. And a lot of people then see that as someone challenging their authority. Like, no, you're going to do this way because I said so. And in my case, like, I'm out. Like, unless I'm here saving the world or helping people, I'm not just here to feather your nest and make you feel like the leader. Like, again, as a leader, stepping into a commando platoon, being the youngest person with a whole team of people who deployed multiple times on combat operations before I ever did, I learned the most by bringing them into planning, listening to them, learning from them, and developing a sort of team approach to how we planned and made decisions. And at the end of the day, the decision's mine and the risk and responsibility sits with me, for better or for worse.
I love that. Immediately made me think of, I was watching a video on Jeff Bezos, and he said that when he goes into meetings, he has everyone in the meeting explain their thoughts before he explains his, so that he's not biasing theirs. And I can imagine it's quite similar. Jocko talks about it a lot as well, that it's a collaborative approach. But you're right. Once all of the options are there, you're the guy that if it goes right or wrong, people above you are going to want to talk to you.
Well, it's also just the opportunity to be the most informed. You know, you don't always have the luxury of time to do that, and I get it. But particularly when we're talking about business and not combat, there's all the time in the world to do that, particularly if you're looking to achieve the best outcomes. You know, it's how organizations innovate and evolve individuals along the way as well.
I think people in the business world can take a page out of the military book in that sense. I think responsibility is a bit different. I think, you know, when mistakes are made, fingers are pointed a lot more in business and said, well, they didn't do that right. Whereas like in your world, it's like, no. It's like, if they didn't do that right, I'm responsible for them.
Absolutely. And there's a big difference between, I'm talking about failure being such a positive and progressive opportunity for, you know, growth. So many people see, it's like failure can come from two ways. One, you didn't do the work, and that's unacceptable failure. And that's in particular where you find people ducking for cover and shirking responsibility, not being willing to stand up and say, hey, I fell asleep on the gun. And then there's failure that comes from genuinely not meeting the requirements of the task, or something being better, or the situation's changing and you not having an effective plan. Particularly in the military context, when we weren't deployed, we were always training for the next mission. We were training and including failure in our training. You know, we were at the range rehearsing what happens if we get a casualty, what happens if we lose communications, what happens if the helicopter crashes, what happens if our systems crash. And we would work through all of these contingencies. And the reason why I know I was an excellent combat commander is because my brain is constantly thinking, if this happens, what am I going to do? If this happens, what am I going to do? Flying onto mission, doing whatever. What happens if this goes down? What happens if that happens? What happens if he gets injured? And my brain's constantly thinking through this contingency plan. So then when that does happen, let's say there's at least 30, 40, 50, 60% of my neural pathway that's already thought that through, and I've got the first foot forward to then take the next step. One of the biggest issues I find in the for-profit world, because again, that's the for-purpose world, it's really hard for people to be able to shut off the systems for a day and test their team in crisis, to be able to go through all these contingencies, because they have to maintain their productivity. You know, they're like, hey, we can't shut down the office for a day because we've got to do this, this, and this.
That's a fascinating point.
Well, it's great. Short term. Long term, you put your team through crisis. When that does happen, you're going to get back on your feet quicker and quicker. It's a really tough leadership decision to tell your stakeholders or your boards, hey, we're going to be not productive for one day this week because we're going to do some long-term training with our team. But I promise you, you'll find some organizations, particularly where the founders are still in charge and they potentially have some positive influence from others who've had those experiences. The more you can condition your team to crisis and failure, the better they will actually perform when that comes. And it's changing that mindset around failure and making sure failure comes from failure in the system, the process, or something happening that you just weren't prepared for, as opposed to laziness and people not doing their job.
So true. And I think what it also comes back to is the buy-in. A big piece of the military is the buy-in to what the military is and what the, what it is to defend our country.
Yeah.
In business, one of the reasons why, leadership wouldn't be willing to invest in those sort of trainings and protocols is because staff just leave. And so it almost comes back to how important the buy-in is of the team.
Yeah, massively. A lot of corporates ask me, the same sort of question. How do we get people motivated to achieve our purpose, motivated to achieve our organizational goals and outcomes? I love people talk about resilience being how you get back up when you fall down. For me, what I learned and while I was able to perform at the highest levels throughout my career is because I actually had these proactive layers of resilience where I never fell down because my head and heart were focused on the team, the mission. In the military, we just call that service. And then my people. The mission, which was the service, the goal, and then my people. Before I ever had any problems inside my own head and heart, before I ever thought about leaving the organization, I had emotional attachment to my team and I was emotionally invested in the mission. where a lot of corporates I find fail is they're trying to simply motivate people to the higher output of the company, the higher mission, the higher purpose. Whereas at the end of the day, you will actually find the best buy-in from people when you connect them to others. When we're like fighting there for our lives, wherever it is in Afghanistan or Iraq, whatever, at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, you're fighting in order to not let down the person next to you. There are moments where you're not fighting to achieve the mission, when you're literally having to fight to save your own lives. You're fighting not to let your mate down. However, you can build those bonds in a workplace, and it comes with how you select people, how you recruit people, how you onboard them, how you train them in their role, and help them to learn how their performance in their job impacts other physical people in the business. That is where I find you can actually help to turn the performance around with individuals, because a lot of people at the end of the day won't care in letting down the multi-million or multi-billion dollar organization if they're having a bad day, but they will care if they truly have an emotional attachment in any way, which we do as humans, to others who will rely on the quality of their work and potentially impact others if they don't perform to their highest duties.
You spent a year abroad in the US.
Working abroad. I post on exchange to the US.
On exchange to the US.
You make it sound like I was a backpacker in the US. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Not university exchange, military exchange. What did you learn about the US and the way they run things?
Oh, a lot. Big boys with big toys and a real world focus. My time, 2015 on exchange to the US Special Operations, and then again in 2017 working within their headquarters as we took the fight to ISIS in Iraq, actually really were instrumental in me deciding to leave the military at the end of the day. I really saw a very difference in mindset and approach to risk and command and authority. So I think I had this conversation with you. I really saw a lot of our senior leadership, be that military and political, a lot of it was, hey, in Australia, the mindset is we want to do this or we need to do this. Let me check with the bureaucrats and all these other people to see, can we do that? No, we can't do that. Okay, we need to change course. Whereas where I got to see from the even middle level leadership in the US context was, hey, this is what needs to be done. Bureaucrats, politicians, all the rest, figure out how to make this happen, because this is what happens. This is what is needed to be done. This is the most tactically and operationally viable course of action for a military context where the considerations are risk to mission and risk to force, our people, as opposed to playing politics and all the rest. And just seeing, and not in a dangerous or irresponsible way, in a, like, you know, you deploy us over here to do a job. This is what we're here to do. We are the people on the ground. We are experts in what we do. This is what we need. And straight away from back in the States, it was like, yep, you have permission to do that. We'll figure out a way to make it work. Whereas in Australia, just the hesitation to commit and apply us to do our job in the way that it was designed to do, the hesitation to deploy our infantry brethren to do their job properly, and the impact that had on them. There were so many different examples I had where we really were pulling the reins on ourselves due to red tape and bureaucracy and the opinions of people who had no idea what was actually going on the ground, but their primary focus was them and their own personal political outcomes.
Do you think that's because of the size of our nation, or is it our British history? Like, why is that?
One of my American mates at Coachella this year pulled me aside and had a really great conversation with me. And he said, hey, I just learned that Australia came from being a penal colony, 200 years ago. Do you think that explains a lot of your culture? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, not like a prisoner culture, but like a jailer culture. Step out of line, get whacked, all these rules and regulations. You have to ask for permission first before you're allowed to do things. A lot of people in authority telling you what to do but not doing it themselves. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Whereas the US really has this very open-minded culture of, we are a superpower in the world. Even if it's not fact that they're the greatest at all these things, they're willing to commit themselves 100% and support their people to the point of failure. And when they reach failure, they learn from that. I just really find there's this massive hesitation in Australia that actually helps us to not achieve our true potential. Like pound for pound, our coalition elements and our mates overseas know, they wanted to have us on every single mission. They know the quality of the people that we have. But, even every time we deployed, I never once flew in an Australian helicopter overseas, always relying on the Americans and all the rest. We just have this, we have the best people and some of the best training, some of the best mindsets, but it's really let down by the system behind it because we're just not willing or confident perhaps to flex that muscle that we have for the right reasons, not simply to show off. Also, perhaps just because we've been able to be so reliant on others to do that when required in the current context. Go back to, your grandfather's time in World War II, the flex we had to provide in Asia Pacific, in Papua New Guinea, on the Kokoda Trail, all the rest. You travel around the world. You go to Paris, you go to Jerusalem, you go to all these places that Australian soldiers fought and freed the people of those nations over there. The respect they have built on the legacy of our soldiers from back in those world wars is incredible. And I just feel we've sort of lost a lot of that along the way from an Australian cultural perspective because we haven't really been required to demonstrate why we need a military in Australia, but all those overseas have. Getting a bit cultural and philosophical with you, but it's just fascinating for me, the more I've traveled around the world, to see how much people hold us in high esteem and how little I've seen that reflected back here, and then translating that into how little, particularly those in government, are willing to sort of back and support our people when it's needed.
It's actually a really important conversation because, every year we have our National Day, and you almost feel at this point that you can't celebrate it.
You're talking about Australia Day?
Yeah, I'm talking about Australia Day.
Yeah.
I think one thing I look up to in the US is their patriotic culture. Are you kind of talking to that as well in terms of a military sense, in terms of like what it feels to wear the country patch on your arm?
Yeah, I also love tying this into mental health and all the rest. So the Royal Commission to Defence and Veteran Suicide just completed after 3 years. We've lost 60 times the number of veterans to suicide than we have combat the last 20 years. And one massive element came down to loss of identity. I believe Australia is having its own identity crisis. We don't know who we are. And all I've ever learnt from, you've got a lot of it from this conversation here, is it comes down to values, what you value individually and collectively and what you're willing to die on. The US in particular has something like their Bill of Rights.
They've got the Constitution.
Yeah, well, we have the Constitution. Australia has this terrible knack of not looking back and reading and reviewing what we have. If you read, some key elements of the Constitution, if you even, read the multiple verses of our national anthem and digest the words, not just sing them for a song, our forefathers and foremothers knew who we were and wrote the blueprint for us. But as is the habit in Western society at the moment, we are instead stuck on current and future news cycles. We're stuck on this very small snippet of living in the moment, wanting to know the next information forward, not putting in the work to understand where we came from, who we are. And instead, a lot of the narrative comes down to, invasion and all the rest. I sit here with you as a fifth generation military man who would happily fight against anyone trying to invade our country. And yet, people like me and you are not allowed to celebrate Australia Day, which is the chosen day for our democracy. And even the flag, every single mission we go on, we wear the Australian flag. Every single mate that I've had killed in combat has the Australian flag draped over their coffin. At the end of the day, we're a democracy. And if the people want to change those things, absolutely. But our inability to rally behind a symbol, and symbology is massive. And if we can't rally behind the Australian flag, like the Americans to rally behind their flag, rally behind their national anthem, all these sorts of things, that's the issue. And organisational identity comes down to culture. Culture comes down to leadership. A leader's ability to unite people with purpose, and the bonds in between are how you form culture. And it has to come from a baseline of collective agreed values. This is why a couple of years ago I started up my own little political party called the Australian Values Party, because you go, I think, at the Department of Home Affairs, we have an Australian values statement that's respect for the freedom and dignity of the individual, commitment to the rule of law, equality of opportunity regardless of race, sex, gender and all the rest, and the right to everyone having a fair go. If you don't have any criteria for how you assess what you do, and we just get so focused on performance outcomes. A lot of businesses are so focused on KPIs, but along the way, you might have the highest performing people who are the absolute worst for culture because they're arrogant, they do whatever they do, they know how to skirt around all the rules and regulations, and everyone's just focused on the outputs. In Australian political context, everything comes down to economy. How well you're managing the economy. Absolutely, that helps us with our own quality of life. But we've removed leadership from politics. Half of the politicians we have in Canberra, are people who you probably wouldn't invite into your own home for dinner. They can't even walk the streets.
I mean, if you went around and interviewed random people, I'd say, a high percentage of people wouldn't even know the name of our Prime Minister right now.
Yeah.
Or they'd name one of our former Prime Ministers.
I mean, and you and I have spoken about this until, back in the day, the whole piece is meant to be about electing who you want to represent you, the leader of the village. We have the British model, in my opinion, until we can elect our own true leader. I'm not talking about republic or anything else like that. Just a simple ability to elect who is going to be the leader of our nation, who we want to represent us domestically and internationally. That's where I think, and in doing so, bringing leadership qualities into a direct ground-up process in how we elect the person we want to be in charge. I think instead we're stuck on electing parties, on policy and politics and who they choose to be our leader. And in particular, you look at places like France, you look at places like the US, you look at places where they're able to elect their own true leader. Very different from the British, who've adopted this model for. They have like the monarch there in their country. That's just my sort of 2 cents. But in my experience, it comes down to leadership and culture, agreed values, going right back to the start and rewriting what your values are, what you stand for, what we stand for as a nation, putting that in schools, teaching people, getting buy-in. That's the way in which you sort of redevelop and reinstill identity and all the cultural elements that come from that.
Yeah, it's definitely not spoken about enough, and it's very, very important.
And it's like the interesting thing about culture and leadership and all the rest, like there's not one blueprint. Like it's such a fun philosophical conversation. We talk about bringing people into, the planning and buying process. Part of the thing that I love was just learning and understanding how different people think, and that's why it's really hard to often come up with agreed values, but it's actually bringing in all the different beliefs of everyone and putting together a roadmap that's best for the whole group, and just being open to these conversations as opposed to adversarial to them. They don't have to be conflict. I just love learning and understanding how different people think, because, I was brought up in one very clean-cut sort of white bread way, and it's through that true diversity, which is diversity of thought, diversity of values, diversity of outlook on life, that I find is the most exciting creativity and best way to sort of bring people together culturally.
You worked closely with one of our former prime ministers. You actually worked with her as in a personal protection capacity. What was that like? Tell us.
Yeah, Julia Gillard. I was her personal security officer. It was literally my first deployment to Afghanistan, which doesn't feel like it makes sense, but it really helped me get over a massive amount of imposter syndrome, feeling like, it's not appropriate for me to deploy the first time with the Prime Minister. But it all came down to all of the training, the skills and preparation, and then additional skills and training for that specific role. It was fascinating for me because particularly in the military, you're apolitical. You don't care. It's not your job to. What I enjoyed about those days in the military was like you weren't allowed to have a political opinion. You didn't want to have a political opinion because at the end of the day, your job is to, look after the head of the current government or the leader of the opposition, or at the end of the day, it's to do the job on the ground. You don't have time to pontificate about politics in Canberra. And I, in particular, got to spend so much one-on-one time with her during that time in Afghanistan, from just the car rides after meetings with, President Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, through to just engagements with soldiers at, the lunch hall. And she was really personally engaging with me and have some pretty open conversations. And away from the cameras, she was clear and decisive and knew her job and were telling the generals what Australia needed to maintain our commitment of troops and all the rest. And I really got to see that authenticity. And there was particularly one conversation I had with her where I was like, man, why don't we get to see more of this from you? Because I'd seen some of her on politics standing up in question time and all the rest. And she was the first person to give me that little insight, being like, you're you got to understand there's so much behind the scenes with the party, going off script and all these sorts of things. You know, you're always constantly sort of having to hold on to your job, particularly in a system where, you know, parties elect their leaders and can just as easily not. And just to see, as I said beforehand, whether it was me with my sexuality or the difference between high performance and elite is mindset, not skill set, how so much of her energy had to be invested in sustaining her position and her role within her own party, as opposed to be able to show true leadership
which comes through authenticity
that I got to see behind the scenes. That's a nice little question to mold some of those conversations together.
What do you think of the word masculinity?
I think it's taken a beating. I think, yeah, it all comes down to your interpretation of it. For me, I see my masculine qualities and masculinity being, you know, I am to protect, to serve, to support. I take my love language is acts of service, and my ability to draw on my masculine strength to be able to protect those who can't defend themselves. Being brought up with some amazing women in my life, being my mum and my sister, you know, I am just genetically wired to protect them and be able to support them. I think it gets lost in male and female. You know, I think there's just this strength in masculine, what we define as masculine qualities. I much prefer to talk about like what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, and also just how much those roles can vary. You know, there's a lot of people, and for a lot of my time, you know, living with my mum during my week and the dad on the weekend, you don't just get feminine qualities here and masculine qualities here. There's actually a merging of the both. And my dad, being one of the most masculine men I knew, was actually the guy who taught me from a young age, it's okay to cry, it's okay to hug people, it's okay to show your emotions, which most people don't expect from a military background. But yeah, my dad was the one there, you know, teaching me it's okay to be soft, to not be masculine and manly all the time, to be a human being as well. So I love words, because particularly in the military, you know, you tell someone to destroy a target as opposed to neutralize or suppress a mission, those difference in words mean massive different definitions. And from an early age in the academy, like words have such true meaning, and I really feel we've lost our way. I'm very cautious of these conversations, like a word like masculinity. I think it's great. It's a strength. It's things we should aspire for. But the whole thing is coming back to identity, not to be defined by you need to be masculine to be a man and this, that, the other, because sometimes there just aren't opportunities for us to demonstrate that masculinity publicly. And we need to realize it's about how we show up for ourselves and demonstrate those things individually, you know, behind closed doors. And I much prefer to talk about, you know, responsibility and values in that sense, as opposed to, you know, masculinity so often is how others perceive you as opposed to how you perceive yourself. So you're already handing that report card to someone else in society, as opposed to you just simply being true to your own values and your own behaviors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a hard one, because like you talk about words, and the way I deliver a word could be very different to the way someone receives that same word.
Because they're bringing all of their lived experience and how they've developed their values and mindset and beliefs to that point. And you think by saying word masculinity, they immediately are going to understand the context you're coming from, whereas they might have come from a context where they've been beat over the head with it for doing that because of whatever has happened in their life beforehand.
What you know, you've had a big few years, right? a massive few years.
Everyone has their own journey. Yeah, it's been interesting.
It's been very interesting, and sad in many ways, and actually embarrassing and deplorable. What was it like for your mum and dad?
Yeah, I guess context for your viewers, going through like the whole court case with the ABC, calling me a war criminal and all the rest, and then being found completely wrong. We weren't even in Afghanistan when they said it happened. We took every diplomatic process available, from, you know, editorial complaints. We raised a petition through Parliament, all the rest, and then had to take them to the federal court. It's been a lot, because my parents, first and foremost, understand that my number one focus has always been my men, my team, my platoon. When you deploy with a group overseas, like I did with my platoon, November platoon in Afghanistan in 2012, and you lose one of your guys over there, that's an experience that just brings you together incredibly. and then for the only public legacy of that Special Forces team, because we don't have social media, none of our stuff's reported in the public, and all of a sudden it's an article published by some reporter from the ABC who hasn't even given you a call to ask questions, saying that you executed someone because they couldn't fit on a helicopter, like you're some amateur bunch who finishes a mission and just randomly calls up a helicopter like an Uber and you don't know who your people are. Yeah, it was a lot. Especially for me, it was a real conflict of, it stripped apart what I thought, kind of like what you were saying beforehand. I thought the majority of society, or society writ large, shared the values I had, because that's what I was brought up in. And that society had at least enough respect to appreciate, hey, these guys go off to war. Any such accusations, should go through a court, be proven criminal, all the rest, before we're just allowed to casually report and make the only legacy of these people what this story is. And I was just so proven wrong. And then when I went to Canberra and met with politicians and met with lots of other distinguished Australians, to be told, to take on the media, to take on the ABC is career suicide. We've got to think about our families. We've got to think about our lives, all the rest. It really was a frightfully lonely place, because as I say, if I got into trouble in Afghanistan, like the day I lost my guy Scott, I had jets and bombs and rockets and everything ready to call in from the finger of God from the sky to support me. But when I needed it most, when we're at our most mentally and emotionally vulnerable, after having lost guys to suicide since coming home, and the most devastating thing we have is being called war criminals, and our families and all the rest have to put through this as well. No one being there to support. And me not being a platoon commander, me not having any authority, me not having any leadership position, but having to find the strength to get out of my own way, because I thought I didn't have the authority to do what I needed to do, and to fight a battle alone and only find a few key people to come along and support me. Yeah, it's been a lot. And then for my family to be the ones behind the scenes to have to pick up the pieces, while I knew I had to maintain this image in the public eye, all the media I did, all the court appearances, all the public profile you get, not being willing to show what it was truly getting to me and doing to me, because I felt that was part of their mission. But it's been a lot for them to have to put through that. And in particular for me, I think my mum said it on that Spotlight episode that we did, where, I went overseas 5 times on combat operations, and my family sort of had to wait to hear from me, and then come home and all the rest. To go through all of that and then have to see me be put through this at home, and see me be put through some of the greatest mental and emotional tests and broken down back at home, safe and sound, outside of combat, has been sort of the hardest thing for them to comprehend, and has unfortunately left a lot of resentment for me and my family as well, because this is the country I went overseas to fight for. 5 generations of our family were willing to fight for. I asked my guys to fight for. One of my guys died for. Others have taken their own lives as a result of. It's really hard to sort of, have a look at the investment you've put into the place, and the return you're getting over here kind of makes you want to pick up and leave if we weren't such a blessed country. It's something I'm dealing with. It's a trauma I'm sort of working through, because it really is it's left a really bad taste. And you can either let that get to you and poison you, or you can try and find the good bits and pieces. And what I will say is, while it's been an incredibly tough 4 years, it's done 2 things. It helped to declutter my life. There are a lot of people in my life who were there when it was highly successful and all the rest. And those who have stayed around have been, true quality people. No, there are only a few. But it really has brought out so much public support. Like the amount of people who will just randomly get online and send a message or send an email or stop me in the streets and have a chat. While I've been so disillusioned with what I call the squeaky wheel, the politics, the media, what we see in the public, there are actually so many people I've realised who are also very disillusioned by that, but are willing to go out of their way, as uncomfortable as it may be, and say, hey, Heston, you don't know me. I've watched your story. I've heard your story. I've been following your story. I want you to know that we support you. We believe in the same values you have. And I'm talking like thousands of people, and they're just the ones who sort of reach out. So it has helped me to appreciate how easy it is to get focused on all the noise over here, but actually appreciate there is so many grassroots, down-to-earth people over here who are there. You just don't hear it all the time.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that you feel like it's fiction. Like you could write a fictional book about it. Like this being a movie would actually make quite a dramatic and interesting movie.
Right. Yeah.
It's bizarre to think that some of the largest, oldest companies in Australia that are almost a representation of our country, they really are,
literally,
can let things happen like that.
Yeah.
And that mistakes can be made at that level.
Yeah.
Like it.
Which is not even mistakes. Like, I can't wait. In the new year, I'm finally going to release my book that I've been writing the last 3 years to help provide some of the background to it. But the most incredible wounds have come from, even lately when we found the ABC added, extra gunshots to their footage and them calling it a editing error, to have no one from the Australian Defence Force stand up and say enough is enough. The fact that you think it's okay in any way to edit any footage from our people in combat when your story is accusing them of war criminals, like, it doesn't pass the pub test, mate. Through to, even the ex-service organisations like the RSL not stepping up, through to just the simple fact that when I brought this to them and just asked for them to take it down and issue an apology to me and my guys, like, they've now had to pay millions of dollars in legal fees, hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages, appoint investigations and all the rest, but they still can't bring themselves to apologise to Heston Russell. That's the incredible part for me, that we're about to go into 2025 in Australia, in this democracy that 5 generations of my family fought for, and our national broadcaster that every taxpayer pays for is unwilling to show some humility and apologise. Like, that's when we talk about values and all the rest, that's when I know, like, we have lost our way. And when I go to the communications minister, Michelle Rowland, and I go to Albo, who I stood next to win the Royal Commission when he was opposition leader, and to have them remain silent and not even respond to emails and requests for meetings with them, you're kind of like, what is this place we're in? Where is some leadership? Where is some spine? Where is some ability to stand up and unite people through just saying, hey, this was failure where people got it wrong. How do we learn from this and make sure it doesn't happen again? But instead we avoid these issues instead of confront them.
Yeah, it's not good enough. We've got a cool, exciting segment to finish.
Oh, good.
But before we do, I know, especially accoladed military men don't like to hear praise. But look, thank you, Heston. On behalf of all Australians, we can't thank people like yourself for doing what you do enough. It's unbelievable, and I mean that's why we're wearing these pins today, is in recognition for veterans, and to express our gratitude.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and I think the difficulty in accepting praise is we just never do it for praise, and I guess no amount of praise will ever actually help you appreciate just how enjoyable the job is when you're in there doing it. And that's the reason why we do it. But no, I appreciate it. I appreciate taking the time to do that, to show your support and all the rest, and to have these conversations, because they're not easy conversations. Any conversation that isn't, again, white bread these days is very hard to. Well, you're gonna hop flack from people from some place, some opinion, and
I mean that's the thing. It's like one of the problems with leadership is trying to please everyone, especially public leadership. You're not going to ever achieve that.
Well, that's it. And I think it has to come down to that purpose. Like, the purpose is to have an open, honest conversation. This is all my opinion through my lived experience. If it doesn't match someone else's, like, that's okay. As opposed to saying, this is the way it is. No, like, we don't know it all. But a lot of people just dig themselves into a defensive place. The purpose of this conversation has been to inform, to engage, to entertain, to draw on information. People disagree with this, great. Like, go nuts. Have your own conversation. Record your own podcast.
Discourse,
Get out there.
debate, public conversation.
Absolutely.
It's so important.
Get in contact. Send me an email. Happy to have a chat.
Cool. I've got a couple of questions. It's called This or That.
This or that.
You just have to answer. I'm going to say 2 words, and you've got to answer one or the other. No explanation.
Difficult for me. Love it. Cool.
New South Wales or Queensland?
Oh, tough. New South Wales. Oof.
Domestic service or overseas deployment?
Oh, overseas. That.
Adrenaline rush experiences or quiet moments of peace?
Quiet moments of peace. 100%.
Strength training or cardio training?
Strength. Cardio hurts.
Covert reconnaissance or direct action assault?
Direct action. Covert. I'm not designed for shitting in a bag and carrying it with me. It's just annoying.
Day combat versus night combat?
Night. 100%.
Trusting intuition or relying on intel?
Ooh. That one is context. I have to say intuition. Yep.
Military life or civilian life?
Oh. I don't know. What did I prefer? I mean, civilian life. It's a really interesting question. I jump into this one. I spent 16 years in the military and then 4 years doing this. So let's say 20 years of my life. I have the amazing perspective, meeting with people like you, hearing about the crew at Forbes, seeing some incredibly successful business people and appreciating particularly the level of performance, youth and energy I had in those 20 years. If I had to put that into business, if I had to put that into a professional career, where I'd be now and where I'd potentially be financially and how I could provide for my family that I sort of said came from not much and all the rest. It's really been fascinating for me going through this last 4 years going, was it worth it? And having those quiet sort of sad moments to reflect and go, imagine if I put all that effort and energy into building a platform for my family where I could be going into work, having a team, enjoying life, not having to worry about media and still people thinking I'm a war criminal regardless of what's being found and all the rest. I would probably, for the benefit of my family, I would probably choose civilian life. But for the benefit of who I am and what I've been able to see and achieve in the world and achieve and appreciate what really matters in the world, military career is sort of what made me who I am.
Well, thank you, Heston. The reason we're sitting here is because of men like you. So thank you for everything that you've done and continue to do. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate the chat.